The last 12 hours. What really happened before the fall? The day began like any other, with the soft hum of city life weaving through the streets. Menglong's apartment, perched on the top floor of a nondescript building, caught the first golden rays of morning. The light fell across the hardwood floor, illuminating scattered scripts and a half-empty mug of coffee. But there was something different in the air that day, a subtle stillness, almost as if the world had paused for just a moment. He woke early, earlier than usual, at 6:15 a.m. The alarm had not gone off. He simply stirred, eyes tracing the sunlight streaking across the room. He moved through the familiar motions, shower, dressing, a glance at his phone, but paused at a message he hadn't expected. It was from a colleague. "Are you ready for the shoot tomorrow? We're counting on you." A simple line, yet it weighed heavily. Menglong sat on the edge of the bed, hand against his forehead, staring at the floor as if the words themselves carried the weight of fate. By 7 a.m., he was out on the street, the city still half asleep. The air was crisp, carrying hints of autumn. He walked to the small cafe he frequented, greeted by the barista who always remembered his order. Black coffee, no sugar. He smiled at her, but the smile seemed fragile, almost rehearsed. A man in the corner of the cafe, reading a newspaper, glanced up briefly before returning to a headline about an actor's sudden fall from fame. Menglong didn't notice, he never did.
Or perhaps he chose not to.
The cafe hummed with low conversation, the clink of cups and saucers, the hiss of the espresso machine. Menglong sat by the window, watching the streets slowly wake. There was a rhythm to the city that morning, a pulse he seemed both a part of and apart from. He pulled out a small notebook, scribbling a few lines, fragments of dialogue, personal notes. His pen moved carefully, deliberately, capturing thoughts he might later forget. By 8 a.m., he was on set. The morning light cast long shadows across the studio floor. The crew hustled and bustled, microphones hanging, cameras rolling. Menglong went through the scene with meticulous care, each line spoken with precision. But there were moments when his eyes drifted, when his hands lingered on props for longer than necessary. Something in him was restless, though he hid it well. Around 10:15 a.m., during a brief break, he stepped outside to the balcony. The city stretched beneath him, an endless grid of motion and sound. He leaned against the railing, feeling the wind against his face. For a moment, the world seemed impossibly large, and he felt smaller than ever. A pigeon landed near the edge, startling him. He laughed quietly, almost absurdly, as though he were sharing a secret only he understood. Yet no one was there. A few crew members noticed him standing there, quietly observing, and wondered if he was thinking of something beyond the day's work. The city seemed to mirror his inner state, moving, busy, yet impassively indifferent. Menglong's gaze lingered on the horizon, and for a brief instant, he seemed suspended, caught between presence and thought, between awareness and something ineffable. Lunch was at noon, a quiet affair at a nearby bistro. He ordered a salad and grilled fish, picking at the food methodically, as if measuring each bite against some unseen standard. Across the table, his assistant tried to engage him in small talk, joking about the latest drama headlines. Menglong smiled faintly, nodded, but offered little. There was a weight in his eyes, a current that no one else could see. By 2 p.m., they were back on set. The afternoon light had softened, spilling warmth through the studio windows. He went through multiple takes, each one more precise than the last. But in between, he'd glance at the exit doors, sometimes fixating on the distant skyline beyond the studio. One of the crew members noticed this, but didn't comment. They had learned not to. Around 4:30 p.m., a phone call came. It was brief, nothing significant in words, but Menglong's expression shifted imperceptibly. He stepped outside to the rooftop for privacy. The city spread beneath him like a miniature diorama. He spoke softly, words lost to the wind. When he returned, there was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before, a tightness that made even casual movements deliberate. By 5 p.m., he took a short walk around the block to clear his mind. The streets were busier now, with evening commuters, honking taxis, and the occasional cyclist weaving through traffic. He passed a small bookstore, the smell of old pages drifting out as someone opened the door. Menglong paused, peering through the glass at the stacked novels, their spines worn. A small smile appeared on his face, subtle, almost imperceptible. For a moment, it seemed he was savoring a quiet pleasure that no one else could see. By 6 p.m., the sun had begun its descent, casting golden streaks across the horizon. He finished the day's work early, requesting to leave the studio ahead of schedule. The crew waved goodbye, noting the unusual quietness in his departure. On the drive home, Menglong didn't touch his phone. He didn't check messages. He stared out the window, absorbing the shifting light, the turning streets, the people hurrying along sidewalks. It was as if he were cataloging every moment, storing it somewhere deep inside. At 7:30 p.m., he arrived at his apartment. The building was quieter than usual, and the elevators hummed a solitary tune as he ascended. Inside, he moved through his living room slowly, touching the spine of a book, tracing the edge of a picture frame, lingering over moments that had once brought comfort. By 8:15 p.m., he was seated at his desk, scribbling in a notebook. The words were not meant for anyone but himself, reflections, fragments of dialogue, and fleeting thoughts that seemed heavier than ordinary. Dinner was simple, a bowl of noodles, eaten while staring out the window at the city lights. Around 9 p.m., a friend called. They spoke briefly, laughter soft and awkward, like two people navigating through thin ice. Menglong ended the call, thanking the friend warmly, yet there was a distant note in his voice, a cadence that suggested he was already elsewhere. By 10 p.m., the apartment was still. He moved to the balcony, the city below now a sea of tiny flickering lights. He inhaled the night air, feeling the pulse of the streets beneath him, the hum of distant traffic, the faint echo of a train passing. He stayed there for nearly an hour, silent, as if listening for something only he could hear. At 11 p.m., he returned to his room. He prepared for bed, yet lingered at the window once more, staring at the skyline, the streets, the world in miniature. His movements were deliberate, slow, almost ceremonial. He paused at the edge of the bed, fingers tracing patterns in the sheets. The clock ticked quietly. Midnight approached. Menglong sat at his desk one last time, notebook open, pen moving rapidly, almost feverishly. The words poured out, dialogue, reflections, fragments of his thoughts, glimpses of hope, regret, and longing. Each line felt like a message, a record of a day that had carried more weight than anyone could guess. He paused, pen hovering, eyes scanning the page. For a brief moment, he seemed lighter, as though the act of writing had lifted some invisible burden. The last 12 hours. Part 2, Moments Unseen. The city outside never sleeps, but inside Menglong's apartment, time seemed to bend. Each tick of the clock marked a rhythm only he could feel. After stepping onto the balcony one final time, the night air wrapped around him like a whispering companion. He inhaled deeply, eyes scanning the streets below, where the amber glow of streetlights reflected on rain-slicked asphalt. Every movement, every shadow, seemed to carry a story he was silently absorbing. He retreated into the apartment, the floorboards creaking faintly under his weight. Menglong moved with deliberate slowness, touching objects that had become familiar anchors, a framed photograph of an early theater performance, a guitar resting against the wall, scripts scattered across the desk like silent witnesses. Each item spoke to him, resonating with echoes of past triumphs and failures alike. At 1:15 a.m., he poured himself a cup of green tea. The steam curled upward, dissolving into the dim light. He held it in his hands, feeling the warmth seep through his fingers. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock, the distant rumble of a passing tram, these sounds became a symphony of solitude. Menglong sipped slowly, savoring the ritual, letting the taste anchor him in the present. A sudden vibration on the desk startled him. His phone lit up with a notification, a simple message. "Thinking of you, hope you're okay." He read it, eyes softening for a fleeting moment. He typed a response, only to delete it, leaving the message unsent. The silence returned, yet it no longer felt empty. It was charged, dense with unspoken thoughts and quiet reflection. By 1:45 a.m., he moved to the living room, drawn by the city lights that filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The skyline stretched endlessly, a jagged horizon of glowing rectangles and distant headlights. Menglong's gaze lingered on the street below, where a lone taxi navigated a slick curve. He imagined the lives within each moving vehicle, fleeting connections passing like shadows. The world continued, oblivious to the subtle intensity of his quiet vigil. Around 2 a.m., he sat cross-legged on the balcony once more, notebook in hand. This time, he wrote with purpose, sketching the fragments of the day, thoughts mingling with memories. A sentence here, a half-formed dialogue there, all flowing together in a river of introspection. The pen scratched urgently across the paper, capturing fleeting realizations before they vanished into the night. A soft sound reached his ears, the distant laughter of a couple walking along the street below. Menglong paused, a wistful smile forming. Their joy seemed simple, almost fragile, yet piercing in its normalcy. He closed his eyes briefly, imagining the warmth of connection, of being fully seen. In that instant, he realized the paradox of his own existence, surrounded by people, yet deeply alone. By 2:45 a.m., a cool breeze stirred from the balcony, carrying the faint scent of rain from earlier in the evening. Menglong leaned over the railing, hands gripping lightly, feeling the pulse of the city beneath him. The wind tugged at his hair, and for a moment, he allowed himself to drift in thought, envisioning every path he had walked, every choice that led to this night. There was no rush, no urgency, only observation, reflection, and a strange, delicate equilibrium. Inside, the apartment's soft lamplight cast long shadows across the floor. At 3 a.m., he returned to the desk, resuming his notebook work. Each line seemed heavier, laden with emotion that refused to dissipate. He wrote about moments of laughter, the echo of applause from early performances, the fleeting kindness of strangers, the weight of expectations, and the invisible burden of constant observation. Words became a lifeline, tethering him to memory, to reality, to himself. By 3:30 a.m., fatigue threatened to pull him into unconsciousness, yet Menglong remained alert. He poured another cup of tea, the ritual grounding him. Each sip was a measured act, a quiet rebellion against the ticking clock and the inexorable passage of time. His gaze fell again to the balcony, where the city seemed simultaneously near and impossibly distant. The streets, the lights, the fleeting silhouettes of night wanderers, all became part of an invisible narrative he was chronicling silently. At 4 a.m., he stood again, pacing slowly through the apartment. The shadows shifted, the floorboards groaned, and the world outside seemed both alive and indifferent. He paused at the window, leaning forward to feel the glass under his fingertips. The night had deepened, the streetlights glowing amber and faintly flickering as dawn approached. There was beauty in the stillness, a rhythm in the ordinary, a story in each unnoticed moment. By 4:30 a.m., he retrieved a small sketchbook, doodling shapes and faces, trying to map the complexity of thought that crowded his mind. The pencil moved effortlessly, capturing nuances, expressions, and fleeting emotions. Each line was deliberate, yet fluid, a testament to a mind both restless and reflective. The sketches felt like a silent dialogue with himself, a record of thought and feeling too intimate for any observer. At 5 a.m., a faint light began to seep into the sky, the first hint of dawn casting a subtle glow across the apartment. Menglong paused, drinking in the transformation of the world around him. The city beneath shifted, traffic increasing, birds beginning their morning chorus, the smell of wet concrete rising with a new day. He felt the weight of time pressing gently, yet he remained still, absorbing, cataloging, and recording. By 5:30 a.m., he prepared a simple breakfast, eating in silence, listening to the distant hum of early commuters. He walked through the apartment slowly, touching surfaces and objects as if imprinting them into memory. Each detail mattered: the curve of the balcony railing, the worn edge of a chair, the warmth of sunlight grazing a photograph. At 6 a.m., Menglong stepped onto the balcony for one last vigil. The city had fully awakened, a living, breathing organism of sound, light, and motion. He leaned lightly on the railing, feeling the wind and observing the streets below. His mind replayed the previous 12 hours, each moment vivid and precise. The cafe, the studio, the rooftop call, the quiet notebook sessions, the rituals of tea and sketching, the flickering lights of midnight streets. He closed his eyes, inhaling the cool morning air, exhaling slowly, letting the weight of these 12 hours settle inside him. For a fleeting moment, he felt a strange clarity, an almost surreal awareness